just feels like winning somehow makes us hungrier.
The dynasty continues for New York.
At this point, we've kind of cemented ourselves as like a quote-unquote dynasty or whatever. Really want to keep pushing that and just see how far we can really go.
When you win, it's like, oh, this is a drug. I want to do this more. I think everyone on this team now understands that drive.
What I love about dynasties is somebody has to knock them off.
DC, they've been chomping at the bit for so long.
MVP Babbitt in Boston, are you serious?
Minnesota played like a first-place team on the road.
Salt Lake's got really athletic, speedy guys.
This O-line has been one of the easiest O-lines I've ever been a part of.
We're not here to get a moral victory. We're going to come out swinging. That's our mindset.
You know, this is why we do what we do, right?
And the Salt Lake Shred winning in overtime.
And who else but Alex Atkins rips down the ball.
Says this is
He's
my
absolutely
disc.
gassed. He's sucking cans of oxygen.
We've kind of embraced the villain role. Everyone says we're the villain, so we gotta just kind of
To
roll
the
with
end
that.
zone for the lead. Williams makes the catch. Are you not entertained?
See you next time.
Welcome back. It's Swing Pass. We're ready and set for opening weekend UFA 2024 on deck, and we could not be more excited. Hi, everyone. I'm Adam Ruffner. I'm joined, as always, by Cameron Brock. And have we got a show for you? We will be previewing the full slate of loaded Week 1 games, as well as jumping into a very special segment with a very special guest. But there's just so much to go over heading into these opening 9 games. You've got the reigning champion New York Empire going for their league record 31st straight win at home on Saturday night. We've got the premiere of the Super Series with DC traveling to face the Salt Lake Shred in a battle of two of the top offenses from last season. We've got a South Division clash between Carolina and Atlanta, two of the top teams in the league, once again going to be contending for titles in 2024. LA and Oakland are reprising their epic rivalry, which went down to the final weekend of the regular season for the last spot in the West Division's playoff race. Lucas Ambrose is making his debut after being the Rookie of the Year last year with LA. Now in Seattle, the reigning MVP, Jeff Babbitt, is making his debut with Boston. There's just so much to get to, so without further ado, we're going to take a short break, and when we're back, we will be joined by Daniel Cohen. Really looking forward to that segment, and then after that, Cam and I will be back to preview the rest of Week 1. Don't go anywhere. We are ready to strap into this rocket ship and blast off into 2024.
The greatest teams, the biggest games, and the thrill of Frisbee. The Ultimate Frisbee Association Super Series premieres Saturday, April 27th, when the DC Breeze take on the Salt Lake Shred.
And welcoming back to the show somebody who needs very little introduction. I'm hesitant to call you a guest. I still think you're technically a host. We need to get some kind of like Master Jackets ensemble, hats, a scarf. Maybe we should go like soccer club, get like a cool scarf for Swing Pass hosts. Anyways, without further ado, welcome back to the show, Daniel Cohen. Daniel, thank you so much for taking time on this busiest of weeks, opening weekend, just 2 days away. We can't be excited enough to have you here for this very special segment of buy, sell, or hold.
So excited to be here. It's fun to be back. I feel like I identify most as a listener at this point, as weird as that sounds, but it does feel like old times. You know, we're back in the Riverside studio. We get me and Cam, the co-hosts of the future and the past, going head to head. It'll be fun.
With the purgatory present and myself. Yeah, no, we don't have a whole bunch of time to spare, so let's just get right into these questions, or I should say statements. And how this segment is going to work is I will present a scenario to Cam and Daniel, and then they will describe whether they will buy, sell, or hold that idea. Hold being not quite certain what they're going to do right now, but don't necessarily want to move one direction or another. So, getting right into it, our first question. New York will three-peat as league champions. Daniel, what's your take on that?
I have to sell this idea. I mean, I think this is the start of the end to this Empire dynasty. This is the writing on the wall is all offseason. The loss of Babbitt, the loss of Oscar. Things just seem to be crumbling a little bit, and I think that's all other teams need to just get more confidence against this New York team that has really just like intimidated all opponents for the last several years. This is now like, I think Philly's going to go into the New York games with a different mindset. I think DC is going to go into the New York games with a different mindset. And with the pieces that Boston now has in Babbitt, Ben Katz, some of their returning players, I think this is a really tough East Division. You get, more higher levels of play all around the league. Looking at the West Division, the South has 3 contenders. There's a lot of parity this year, and I don't think New York has done enough this offseason to like clearly rise above it all. So I'm selling it. They are not three-peating this year.
Cam?
Yeah, I'm selling. I think when you look at the East, there's only 2 teams in that division that clearly got better, and that would be Boston and Montreal. I think every other team in that division got visibly worse. There are some interesting new pieces that might be added to some of the other teams, but I think it's pretty easy to look at, New York, obviously, with the departures of 2 MVP players, one of their coaches, a really, savvy defensive player in Ben Katz. Looking at DC losing Christian Boxley and a slew of defenders that have gone elsewhere or just aren't playing this year. I think the only 2 teams that got better were Boston and Montreal. Montreal, obviously, winless last year. So when we're talking about title contention, I really think this is going to be a 3-horse race. And I think the division, I anticipate a lot of teams beating each other up. And I just don't see how New York can be as efficient offensively. That's really where the drop-off's going to be. I think defensively, they can be just as strong as they've been and maybe even stronger as some of those players just become a year older, a year smarter as defenders. A lot of that defense, while they do have some age with the Drosts, for instance, they do have younger players who aren't even close to their prime yet, who are just going to keep getting better. Guys like Brett Tan, John Randolph. You have someone like Antoine Davis, who's just kind of coming into his own as just this elite defender. But on the offensive side, how are you going to match the efficiency that they had with the line when you are replacing 3 of your offensive starters, 2 of which were, former MVPs, and one of them being the current, the reigning MVP? I just don't see it. I think there's just too many opportunities where teams can pick them off. But I'm not sold on the idea that it couldn't happen, but if I have to take the field, I'm taking the field.
What was your answer?
I am not going to hold. If I have to pick one or the other, I'm selling. I don't think.
Oh, yeah.
2 months ago,
I'm turning off your mic. No. I get the Daniels back on the show now, so we almost have to hedge.
I have to hedge. Somebody has to hedge.
Yeah. I didn't even hedge on that first. I'm saving my hedging for later.
No. If Oscar does not come back, they will not win the championship.
I like that.
Okay.
I like that.
Full stop right there.
I agree with that.
I'm going to go ahead and agree with both of you on the sell aspect. I'm just not as, I think, enthusiastic about it as you two. I very much appreciate where Daniel's coming from. I think that's where I most fall down. I think the gap tightening between New York and the rest of the competitors in this league, it's been so pronounced that just anything that makes the Empire a little bit more mortal is going to be such a benefit in these contests. We've all talked about it. These championship weekend games just have gotten out of hand with the way New York just sort of imposes. And I think that they've come down off that dais, right? I don't think that they can assert in that way. And I am selling. However, I'm also going to hedge a little bit because you still look at this roster, and in particular, the defense, man. The defense. I know you guys want to talk about the offense and the efficiencies and whatever, but offenses can be worked on throughout a season. I think defenses more and more in this league are where the kind of history of a team comes from. You talk about the Madisons and Minnesotas in the Central, Atlanta and Carolina in the South, and now New York in the East. And I just think, like you were just saying a moment ago, Cam, with Antoine and Breton, and my kind of pick for defensive player of the year this year, John Randolph. You still got the Drosts there. There is some heft to this defense that I still think is just going to be a bear for opponents to get through. And so while I'm selling them three-peating as an outright champion, I'm still buying them as the probable favorite out of the East. and still a likely team to make it to championship weekend. I just think they might have some more denting and a little bit more foibles than we've ever really seen with this current dynastic run from New York. But those are just my ideas.
I do think that they're, like, if I had to pick one team that's the favorite to win the title, it's still New York. But percentage-wise, like, if you broke down... We need DraftKings odds back. I've been missing DraftKings odds. I'd be really curious to see what they give New York and what the rest of the field would get. But in my mind, it's like, I don't know, maybe a 30% chance that New York wins the title. Does that seem low?
As opposed to, like, 80 last year.
Yeah, exactly. It was 80 last year, if we're being honest.
Yeah.
What was it that low? Was it that low?
I mean, they went to an overtime game against Philly, DC too.
They play close games.
You want to fuel the Philly close loss fire? Is that what we're doing?
Can we revisit Cam saying that he thinks it's a 3-team race in the East? I know you guys have talked about this before, but you really like firmly believe it's New York, DC, and Boston, and you've just like already counted out Philly?
Philly has to prove to me that they can play like the hot birds for more than half of their season. Like they play like the cold birds the other half. They look bad against bad teams. They looked like they went to Pittsburgh last year, who I think they were clearly better than, win by a goal, right? They want to talk about their close losses. Let's talk about their close victories while we're at it too then. I think like they go play Montreal in a game that they kind of end up pulling away from late, but they look really terrible throughout the first 2.5 quarters of that game. I can't get over the fact that they just have no consistency in their play. When they start to value the disc more on offense, and I think this really comes down to, I'm going to put this on the coaches. Like as coaches, you have to find ways to hold your players accountable to make better decisions. And if you don't do that, they're just going to keep doing it. I got benched once. I think at a time when I was leading the league in goals, I got benched off the starting O-line because I was having turnover issues. And I came in 3 or 4 points into that game after that benching and had the best game of the season that I'd had. It was like +8, 0 turnovers. Like, the bench is a great teacher. It teaches great lessons. And I think sometimes you have to be able to pull that out. And they haven't pulled that out in Philly. They just be like, oh, you throw the disc away. Whatever, I think they got to find ways to limit the turnovers before I can take them seriously. And if they do that, I'll be the first to say congratulations to Philly. But we've got too many years of data that tells me it's not happening.
Fair enough.
No, I mean, those are all fair points. But I think we should move on to our next buy, sell, or hold option. Cam, I'm going to let you take the first crack at this one. Buy, sell, hold. A non-East player will win the MVP in 2024. It is a team not from Boston, DC, Philadelphia, New York, Toronto, or Montreal.
I am buying this. And here's why. I think we've kind of already hinted at the fact that New York isn't going to be quite the powerhouse that they have been. They could still definitely win the East and represent that division, but I don't think it's going to be in an undefeated capacity. I do think, however, there are some teams across the league that could look more dominant in their division, and I'm really looking out west. I am actually going to say that I think the West division is going to produce the MVP this year, and I'm going to even narrow it down a little bit more and say it's going to come from Colorado or from Salt Lake. I've already mentioned before in a previous pod, who are some players outside of New York I think could have a chance at the MVP. Alex Atkins, Quinn Finer, Jordan Kerr, I think are all very, very good picks for that. Guys who can really affect a game and take over games. So I'm going to take the West, actually. If I had to nail a division, I'm going to say, yes, someone outside of the East will win the MVP.
So he's buying. He's buying. We're not stock traders here. I know the terms are all off, but you're buying. Okay, non-East player.
Buying.
Daniel?
I'm going to buy, and I'm going to say Jordan Kerr is winning MVP this year. I really think if Oscar and Babbitt were out of the picture last year, it would have been Kerr's. If you said the same thing the year before, it would have been Kerr's. Now that they're gone, like I see Salt Lake continuing to improve. All the pieces around him are getting better. I feel like that unlocks more and more of his game, especially as he's putting in the work that he is and really just like approaching his prime. I really feel like we haven't seen the best Jordan Kerr yet. So there's just like this overall ascent happening both with him and with Salt Lake. And with championship weekend being held in Salt Lake this year, we know the MVP is like partially tied to team success, right? So if Salt Lake goes to championship weekend, maybe wins a game, maybe wins 2 games, who knows? I think Kerr is going to be in a very good spot to win the MVP.
No, I tend to agree with you, and before I give my response, I just want to complicate a bit. So one of the things that I keep coming back to is just, you know, obviously we're all, I think, a little New York fatigued. They've won the past 4 MVPs, 2 by Ben Yard, a Ryan Osgar, and a Jeff Babbitt in there. They've obviously been in 4 straight championship games, won 3 of them, back-to-back champions, 30 straight win, everything, right? Like they've got that pedigree. How do you deny, after all of this noise right before the season, after this disruption to basically their championship parade heading into the season, how could you deny if there was another monster Ben Yacht season, say something approaching 40-40, 50-50 in 15 blocks, totally within his zone? The other one, Jack Williams. What if Jack just goes nuclear now that he has a little bit more roam and playmaking ability? I feel like he's been so disciplined in being that stabilizing QB1 who kind of steps into that role whenever they need it, that he hasn't really shown much of his bodacious, I think, Jack Williams, just next level athleticism that he's capable of. Like, what if one of those 2 dudes just cracks off and has one of their 2 best seasons ever, and New York goes 10-2 and they make a championship game on the back of all this quote unquote adversity that they're facing, right? That would kind of be my problem. The other one would be Jeff Babbitt stepping in and replicating a season like last year and leading Boston to either the East Division title game or championship weekend. Those are 2 where I'm just like, oh. And the other one is if DC somehow summits everything and a Johnny Malks or an AJ Merriman or a Rowan or, you know, Thomas Edmonds gets slotted into the Christian Boxley superstar role in the Breeze offense and just puts up crazy NASA numbers. Those are all complications to the East thing. But I'm going to agree with you guys. I'm going to sell. The other West Division person I wanted to throw into the hat mix was Khalif El-Salam. The half season that he showed last year and the way that he's been talking in the offseason about the kind of pride he's feeling around this Cascades team, I'm really excited for this Cascades team, by the way. There's something there finally. For the first time since 2016 for the Seattle area that has so much talent. There's, I think, both tinder and flame now to get something a little bit more combustible. And so I think if Khalif plays in like 10 plus games in Seattle and has a playoff spot, and they could do something similar to say like LA last year, where they just sort of punch up through the chaos and end up in a West Division finale against Salt Lake or Colorado, like I think that that's on the table. And if Khalif puts up the kind of per game averages that he did last year and they're winning, I'm just saying.
You guys have both talked up Seattle a good amount. I don't know. Seattle for me, it's like I'm higher on Philly than I am on Seattle. Like I haven't seen anything from Seattle in the last however many years. What, it's been since 2016 since they were a good team?
They don't have a clear third team in the West. I think that's the difference for me.
Yeah, but
like I'm down on Philly because like let's just look at who they're competing against. Whereas in the West, it feels like there is no clear third team right now. Like LA lost people.
I hate to interrupt you, Oakland, but I would even say like there's not a clear second team right now. I think that Salt Lake has sort of distanced itself from the Colorado losing at home to LA. There's just I know. I think we all favor Colorado on paper here, but the results speak for it, right? Like you can't just ignore that. They lost a home playoff game. That's a big deal.
I guess I just don't see, maybe it's that I don't know like all the pieces that Seattle added. Like I think it's some older players and like some former UFA players that I'm less familiar with, but like LA's ascent made a ton of sense last season by getting Pavel and by getting McDougal back, and like they we saw like how their system evolved. I'm not seeing as same thing with Oakland with like Mechanix and like all those guys offensively that just kind of all got better. I'm just not seeing the same route to success for Seattle. I like Ambrose a lot. I like him a lot. Man. I don't know. I feel like the offense has to really level up, and you know, Garrett Martin, Khalif, and Zeppelin Ronnie can only take you so far, right?
I'll just complicate it by this. They lost week 1 on the road right away to Salt Lake. They went to Oakland, and it took until overtime at home for that Spiders team to put them down. That was a tough way for Seattle to start 0-2. There was a mid-season game against LA at home where they were in a shootout. It was like 25-23. Aviators won, but Cascades were on their heels the entire time. There's something. I agree with you. There's no real proof to it yet. I kind of feel the same way about Boston too, but that why don't we just segue to that? That's gonna be our next question. So let's get right on to it. Daniel, this one will be for you. Buy, sell, or hold. Boston is a legitimate title contender in 2024, especially after the last week when they've now signed Ben Katz, re-added Orion Cable, and Phil Joyce, who are not previously on the roster, and just have sort of rounded things out to this suddenly stupendous glory offseason. I feel like Leffler when I said that. That was like
yeah, that was a good. That was a good word.
That was weird.
I liked it.
I didn't like that.
Yeah, Boston. It's like I think they're a legitimate dark horse title contender. That I feel like that's like kind of a hedge where it's like no one's favoring them to win the title, but you look at their roster and it is kind of built like a championship contender. The only hesitation is just like the availability of all these guys. Like, how are they all going to mesh? Like, we've seen really up and down roster consistency really throughout all their years as a franchise since 2021. And I just don't know if there's ever been a moment where I'm like, okay, this Boston team, like, this is their identity. I don't think they have a clear identity. I think they're going to be looking for it this season. But yeah, I mean, with Babbitt, Tanner Johnson and Orion Cable, like, if those three big guys can just like dominate offensively, defensively, wherever they end up, like, Boston just has a lot that teams will have to deal with. So that's where I go, okay, if those guys can really like find their rhythm, if they can limit turnovers to it has a lot of potential. And that's not even mentioning guys like Ben Sadok, Kalen McSweeney, Cole Davis-Brand. It's like they have throwers all over the field. They got Rocco Linehan, Tyler Chan on defense. They just have a lot to like. I didn't even mention Ben Katz. But all that said, you know, I don't think they're going to win the title, but they are a contender. So I think I'm buying the statement.
Okay.
I am selling. I buy that they can make it to championship weekend.
That's a contender.
I sell the fact that they can win
How is making it to championship weekend not a contender?
I don't think. I think if they make it to championship weekend, they're one and done. I don't think that they make it to the title game.
Wait. Now I need to interrupt you. Like Daniel just said, you're saying if they make it through the East that they can't win a game at championship weekend this year? Come on.
Yeah, I know. Wild, huh? Here's where my head's at. I think actually you look at the history of our league, it's actually kind of the same thing that you typically see in all pro sports. We don't see teams make it to championship weekend for the first time and have that success.
Yeah,
like,
that's true.
They don't do it. Like, even though a lot of people might forget that New York actually made it to championship weekend in 2018 before winning in 2019 because they weren't the favorites in 2018. I think DC was the favorite that year to make it out of the East. Correctly. Regardless, they had to make it there and take their lumps before they came back the next year. And Bo Kittredge was like, I don't like losing a championship weekend. This is a weird feeling. Why don't we just go win it next year? We've seen that. I almost feel like they have a better chance to come out of the East, as you said, like, well, how would they make it out of the East? There's just so much, there's just going to be so much adrenaline pumping into those games, especially against New York, I think. Like, it's very much going to feel like that is the championship game. And I think offensively, especially if all those guys are showing up every week, they finally might have what I feel like they lacked last year offensively, was just some finishers, like some guys that, like, you've had the disc for a little bit and you have guys who are just going to end the point. Jeff Babbitt is just going to decide the point ends here, right? And Orion Cable is perfectly capable of that as well. And the thing with him has been, as Daniel alluded to, availability. How much is he playing? If those guys are bought in and they're all there throughout the season and meshing together, they can win the East. Like, I wouldn't favor them, but I wouldn't put it past them. But getting to championship weekend and having to then go through two very good teams, whoever they may be there, I think that's a different beast where you don't quite have that built up investment of the off season of like us versus them. Like, we're trying to punch through Babbitt and Katz's former team. Like, I just don't know if a team's going to do that in their first trip to championship weekend. So I sell that they're going to actually contend and like win a title. I do see scenarios where they could make it to championship weekend, though.
You're 2 for 2 on hedges, Cam. I'll say that.
I am not hedging. They will not win the title. I do not believe in them winning the title. Stamp it in ink, whatever.
I'm going to use my hold on this one. Jury's out for me on this.
Boo.
It's my one hold. I got to use one. And it's on Boston, deservedly, because I come down on both sides with this, right? Like, I agree with what Daniel said. You look at the roster construction, particularly their starting offenses and defenses, who kind of keys in for their number one matchups on defense and who they can go to on offense. It looks like a championship team on paper. I just want to say that flat out. It does look that way. But that's immediately brought into relief by Boston's general performance and culture the past couple of years. I mean, this is a team that went into 2021 with a lot of lights and show and hype, and they brought it into that week 2 matchup. They had Atlanta on the ropes. It was the game of the week, and it just slipped out of their hands. Kind of ever since that moment, it's been a lot of up and down for Boston, and they haven't really had a definitive victory yet, too. You know, this is a team that's still kind of pursuing something that really they can sink their teeth into and be like, all right, win over DC or New York or some kind of interdivisional opponent. Glory don't really have that. They've leapfrogged the Philly team that I think we're all, Philly included, kind of equally frustrated by its level of variance. And it's like, well, that's good for Glory, but to Cam's point too, this isn't a league where you just suddenly skip to the front of the line and get your title. I mean, I know Dallas did it in 2016, and there is some precedence with the Oakland franchise before that with Bo Kittredge's first year, but that was in the pre-modern era. That doesn't fly anymore in 2024 UFA. And so I don't know, because what I'm so interested about is that cultural shift, that cultural impact from New York to Boston with Babbitt and Katz, who have been renowned locker room presences. And so it's just, for me, it's going to take just kind of like 4 games to see how their sideline looks together. There's so many just sort of jammed together pieces now. We don't know how it's going to look. Like, to what you two were both saying, there's been so much lineup inconsistency. There's not really been an identity to this Boston team. And so I just want to see a little bit more data before I go one way or another with this particular one. Another name that hasn't been mentioned that I think is going to stand to benefit tremendously from the additions. Last year, finalist for Rookie of the Year, Simon Carapella. He was a goal-scoring phenom last year and a finisher that they did have at times. And I just think being able to kind of run amongst the trees of Babbitt and Orion Cable and Tanner Johnson go and sort of work the middle game, which is what Carapella is so good at, and getting maybe not the top 3 defender every time, I could see him having some game where some team forgets about him and he puts up 12 goals. Like, not joking. Like, some team decides to invest all of their focus in Babbitt and Orion Cable, as they maybe should, and Carapella just scampers for double-digit scores. Like, I could see it. And I could also see Boston struggling to score 20 goals for the first set of games as they kind of figure everything out. So,
yeah,
I don't know.
They're a team to watch. I like that we kind of all agreed while each picking a different thing. You notice that? Like, I feel like all of our reasoning is kind of the same, but we all picked a different answer. was cool.
Well, we won't have too much longer to wait. Boston will get to officially kick off the season. We need a better word for that. We can't say opening pull the season, but like kick off the season will start with Montreal at Boston on Friday night on Watch UFA TV. Babbitt and Katz will be active in that, as well as Tanner Johnson Go. Looks like Orion Cable won't be making his 2024 debut yet, but tons to pay attention to in that game. But we should keep going and buy, sell, or hold. We'll get to game previews with Cam and I later in this episode of Swing Pass, but we've got just a couple more questions. Daniel, your next question is, well, it shouldn't be a question. It's a statement. Sorry. Salt Lake will repeat as West Division champions. Buy, sell, or hold?
Yeah, I'm buying that. I just think, like, how can you... Nah, we kind of already talked about it. Like, I think they definitely grew the gap between them and the next closest team, I think, at the end of last season, then throughout this offseason. Like, yeah, we saw LA get a little worse. I think Colorado should still be good, but given the season that we just saw from Colorado, where it was just like a grab bag of what you were going to get from that team week to week, and they had the whole Nethercut experiment with defense, and then he missed some games, then they had to restructure the offense. Cody Spicer's gone this year. There's too many doubts for me with the other teams. Whereas with Salt Lake, they returned all of their offensive starters. They got Joe Merrill back from DC. They got a couple other defenders. I know they did lose Joel Clutton. But yeah, I think Salt Lake is just going to kind of continue their ascent, and Colorado is going to challenge them. Maybe LA, maybe Salt Lake, or maybe Seattle, maybe Oakland are going to challenge them, but really it's Salt Lake's division to lose pretty clearly in my mind.
You know, you mentioned Clutton loss. That was one of the most interesting episodic additions, I think, in this league's history, right? Like, wasn't on the team to begin the season after being a Defensive Player of the Year finalist in 2022, looking like a god among men at times on the field. Joined Salt Lake midway through the year, looked weird before championship weekend. I'll just say that. He looked like he was off on the range for most of the summer or something, not necessarily in pro shape quite yet. But then obviously gets into playing shape, makes that incredible MAC to send Salt Lake to their first championship game. I just think it deserves some history there because, you know, you talk about a substantial loss for Salt Lake, but it's like, he was there and then just gone. It was like,
I know, he was just like right. Like he came in for that one play and then the rest. I mean, I will say the rest of championship weekend, he did play really well. He did play really well.
Yeah. No, he was one of the few players still hauling his ass off in that championship game and striking some fear into Empire players and not really slowing down at all. I think he was very much in his peak form by the end of the season. It was just so weird seeing him added mid-season. The Portland game where they were kind of trying to get him acclimated, but he just looked slow. Anyway.
Yeah.
So I am buying this, but not for the reasons that you might think. I think the schedule actually plays a big part in why I'm buying this. I do look at the schedule from Colorado, and it just seems a little more treacherous than the schedule. Like, they only have one game against Portland, for instance, whereas Salt Lake has two. Portland had its struggles last year. And, you know, we look at the Colorado schedule, their out-of-division games are kind of insane. Like, they have to play Atlanta, at Madison, and at Minnesota on back-to-back days, while I think they'll take care of business in Madison on that first day. Going to Seafoam Stadium on tired legs does not sound like a fun trip for anybody. We do go out there and play them as well very late in the season. I think there could just be some potential stumbles there. I do know that Salt Lake obviously has one of the most anticipated games of the year to kick off their season against DC. I believe they go to New York later in the season, which that's going to be a tough game. So I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see how the scheduling plays into it. But I will say this, head to head, I'm actually going to say that I think they end up splitting. So I think just by virtue of the rest of their schedule, I'm favoring Salt Lake. But we saw last year, even though Colorado was kind of up and down in their play, they were still close games with Salt Lake.
One-goal games.
You would think they would have been, one-goal games. Like, one game was literally a D on the goal line as time expired, right? And this was a Colorado team that was pretty injured last year, and injuries are a tricky thing because, a lot of times you see those players that get injured and they can typically keep getting injured in some way, shape, or form. But man, some of those defenders that they had last year, because it wasn't just, we think of Cody Spicer, like he's like the guy you go back to. And of course, without Cody Spicer this year, you cannot replace a guy like that. But like Saeed Samaran last year was fantastic when he was available. I think if Alex Atkins is healthy the whole season, he missed some time last year. I just look at this Colorado lineup and I just don't think we ever really saw the full potential of what they could have been last year. And even given that, they were right there in those Salt Lake games. So I'm buying Salt Lake to win the division. I do think it's going to be one of those things, though, where like it's literally like a game or a goal differential thing. Like it's going to be very close at the top. This is, for me, going to be the most exciting matchup. I know in recent years it's been New York and DC has been kind of like that. What's going to happen in this matchup? For me, the matchup I'm most excited to watch is Colorado Salt Lake. Like I want to see those games. That's going to be like go rewatch, rewind every point, break down, see what's happening. That's going to be like the stuff I'm nerding out about.
They were great last year. I mean, they were great last year and the year before, except when Colorado just like stomped Salt Lake that one time. But I feel like New York, DC is still going to have a ton of intrigue, but I hear what you're saying.
I'm having a tough time deciding what's my actually most anticipated matchup. I feel like this first Super Series game might be. It's such a hypothetical between DC and Salt Lake, and they have such, I think, similar styles at times. They both love throwing talent. They both have tremendous team speed. They're not particularly large teams, which is something we'll talk about later in the preview, but yeah, I don't know. I struggle to pick what is going to be the most exciting matchup for 2024. I don't think you can really go wrong with either of the ones you guys listed. But as far as Salt Lake repeating as division champs, I'm going to buy it as well. I'm going to be boring and agree with you guys. I just wanted to pose a question. I was looking at strength of schedules. Cam, you mentioned Colorado's. They have the third toughest strength of schedule this season. Salt Lake is top 10 as well. I don't know if it actually will manifest in the particular ordering of playoff seeding in the West, but looking at Daniel's article from a couple months ago about strength of schedule, Seattle and Los Angeles have some of the most favorable schedules in the league. They don't play tough out-of-division opponents like Salt Lake and Colorado. Is that maybe a way in which this gets complicated a bit? Do you think that scheduling plays such a great magnitude that a team like LA, Seattle, Oakland possibly kind of closes that gap enough to make a Salt Lake or a DC really start sweating it? Because, I mean, to that point, Salt Lake loses to the two teams from the East that they're scheduled. That's two losses that they didn't have last year in DC and New York, I mean, I guess they had the one against New York, but, like, that's not something Seattle has to contend with. Seattle just has to go and deal with West Division opponents. I don't know. I'll leave it up to you guys to decide.
I don't know, because it's like, I feel like we did almost see Colorado slip out of the 2 seed last year, right? Like, and I think it is those interdivisional games that end up adding up. Like, a guaranteed loss to New York is not something you want on your record, and obviously it's never a guarantee, but yeah, it's a luxury those other teams have. The part I'm going back to is that, like, I don't know, I feel like LA, Oakland, Seattle, they all have easy schedules, but I feel like they're all just going to be competing with each other for that 3 seed anyway. So yeah, like, I don't know if it's enough. Like, I don't think Colorado is going to like fall so much to the point where one of those 3 teams could overtake them, but you never know. I don't know. Cam, what do you think?
I think also LA and Oakland objectively got worse this offseason. So like losing Mac Hecht on offense for Oakland, I think is like such a huge part because he was kind of the stabilizing force on the O-line that kept them from always just shooting the disc deep and relying on that. And I think when you look over LA, like you lose a guy who led the league in Ds as a rookie, like you would just imagine he's going to be even better in year 2. Maybe not necessarily have the same amount of Ds, but just as a defender being savvy and like being able to be helpful on a counter attack, like you would just imagine he's going to grow and get better. And they added some other pieces as well. It wasn't just Lucas Ambrose, but he's obviously the headliner So I think when you look at it that way, Seattle being, not able to beat those teams last year, them raising their bar while the other two bars are lowered. I think you're right. There's going to be some beating each other up. But I also think you're both kind of right. Like, I just don't see Colorado falling enough or to like have to worry too much about it. That being said, I mean, road trips can be tricky. Like, I think they're going to go into Madison and take care of business, but Madison we know is going to have a great crowd. We know that they're going to be amped up for that game. And like that could be a trap game too, where they're looking forward to Minnesota and game planning for them and trying to figure out what they're going to do there and kind of overlook. And we know what Madison's going to do. They're going to muck it up. It's going to be low scoring. You're never going to get a huge lead on the Radicals because they slow the game down. But I just don't see them blowing too many of these games out of division. The Atlanta one obviously is the one that I think jumps out, but that's a home game like that. That's maybe advantage.
What about
them,
you guys?
Right? So
are you guys going to beat them in Colorado?
I know. I've been waiting for him to talk about Indy,
I have
Colorado.
all the confidence
He's
in
just
the
been
world.
kind of avoiding that altogether.
Hey, they already started tweeting about how this game was going to be outdoors. So, whatever.
What's Colorado's,
like,
what's their record going to be against the Central Division this year? At Madison, at Minnesota.
So they have 3 games against the Central Division.
Right,
0-3, baby. Oh,
I agree though. The Madison game is sneaky. That's going to be an interesting one.
The Madison game, I think, if they lose that one, it's going to be purely because they were looking past them. I think they're too talented of a team. Madison's lost Henry Goldenberg, Jacob Rubin-Miller. Those are huge losses, I think, that they could have added in. They do get, Kai Marcus is back, KPS is back. It'll be interesting to see what they look like after coming back from injury. Kai Marcus definitely gives them some, throwing talent that they sorely were missing, especially in the deep game. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what Madison looks like this year. But it's really we have 2 guys coming off some pretty bad injuries. So you never know what they're going to look like until they're actually out there. I don't see it. Colorado is just going to be so good. And Madison's just struggled so much on offense over the last few years. Ever since the 2018 championship year, the offense just has never gotten back on the rails, right? It's just they haven't been able to recover from losing all the great throwing talent and just that roster that was together and building for so many years. So I just don't see it. But the Minnesota game, going in there, tired legs into Seafoam Stadium, that is a game to watch for sure, where Colorado could drop one. I have all the confidence in the world we can go out there and win, obviously. I wouldn't be playing if I didn't feel like we could go out and win that game. I'm excited for it. I can't wait for it. It's going to be a good time. July 4th weekend, it's going to be fun. So I hope we can go out there and put on a good show. I know I've talked with Seth Barris a little bit from Colorado. He's looking forward to having us out there. We're looking forward to going out there. It'll be a good time. I feel like it'll be a good game regardless. Of course, I'm going to say we're going to come out on top, but that's the competitor in me, and that's the belief in my teammates too. So
I think Colorado is going to go 3-0 against the Central. All due respect, I mean, they Donnybrooked Minnesota last year. I know that was a Minnesota team on the road, and they were just returning Abe Coffin. They were without Sam Berglund and some other defensive starters, but I mean, the Summit thrashed them by 10 goals. And Minnesota will have a little opportunity at a revenge game in the middle of the season, getting them the second night of the back-to-back, but I don't know, man. Colorado's a lot to handle. And Madison will have its tricks on defense for sure, but that's Summit defense against Madison's offense. They could reach 20 blocks.
That's
the
real
They could
mismatch.
legitimately reach 20 blocks. Noah Kuhlman could set a single game blocks record against Madison in that matchup. I'm not even joking, dude.
The first
Madison
9-block game? It's always been a 5-way tie for 8 blocks is the record.
8,
the single game record. Yeah.
I mean, look, Dylan DeClerc got 5 in the 2021 season debut by sitting around and swamping in the lanes and being a little gator. And Kuhlman is twice as athletic right now as him doing that kind of stuff. DeClerc is a fantastic defender, but I mean, Kuhlman can explode into lanes, and Madison just dilly-dallies in that space so much. Anyways, we're getting off into a thread here. We should get back on track. We're stock traders. We're going back to the market floor. We've got a buy-sell trader. Next question. Cam, I'm coming to you. Atlanta will make it 3 different South Division champions in 3 straight seasons when they win their first South Division title later this year. Buy, sell, or hold?
Buy, baby. Buy. While we've talked about some other divisions and teams improving, I don't know that you can look at Atlanta's roster and say that from a roster perspective they got better. In terms of additions, they lose Liam Haberfield, who we have somehow failed to mention when we were talking about New York earlier. I think that is an interesting add, and I'm excited to see what he looks like in that offense. I think he is going to fill in, and not that he's going to be Ryan Osgar, but like he's going to take on a role where the offense.
If you were to create a player that was like Ryan Osgar in most faculties, Haberfield is about as close as you can get.
He'll be really good.
So I think obviously that loss, but the other thing is he is not like someone who was a fabric of the Atlanta system. He's there for 1 year. He wasn't even there for every game. He was in and out of the lineup. So while losing him is not ideal, I don't think it affects what they're going to be able to do. I'm excited, as I was last year, maybe even more so, to continue to watch the Justin Burnett show. That dude is incredible. I hope he's available like the whole season. I know early in last year he's still doing some college stuff and wasn't at every game, but they just seem to be so good at every position on both sides of the disc. They have so much talent. They have so much time together playing offense. Their offense is as smooth as any in the league. And I think they've gotten pretty battle tested over the last few seasons. They're going to have some tough matchups throughout the year to continue to play in tough games and big games that people have eyes on. They have a game, they play out of division against Colorado, New York, and Indy, I believe. I might be missing another one. They get, of course, the good games against Austin and Carolina inside of their division. I think this is the year they punch through. They've been so close a couple times, 2 out of the last 3 years. They've been right there.
Walk-off. They've lost on walk-offs to make their first championship weekend appearance, possibly.
This is the year. This is the year it happens, and I think this is the year it has to happen. I mentioned this a few weeks ago. While that offense has been so great, it is aging. They are getting to the point where some of these guys might be retiring, or at least getting to the point where they're no longer plateaued, but are starting to go down on the other side. So I think there will be a little bit of pressure on this unit, offensive unit in particular, to perform this year. But I think we've seen enough over the last several seasons to know that they can do it. So I'm buying. They're going.
Daniel?
It's like I want to buy because I really like their culture and just the trajectory of that franchise since like 2019. I mean, it seems like they've really established themselves as this elite group. But I'm gonna sell because I think it's gonna be Carolina this year. I think I just like Carolina's roster more. If Atlanta had like 1 or 2 offseason additions that I was excited about, then maybe I would swing the other way. But I don't know. I think Carolina getting back Henry Fisher, adding Drew Swanson, getting back Alan Laviolette, like this is kind of the second coming of their 2021 team, and then maybe boost it up a little bit. No, Matt Guccio-Hannes is like the main kind of switch up in their offense compared to their championship year. But yeah, it feels like a Carolina year to me. I don't know if I have enough confidence in Atlanta in those big games. Like, I know you can kind of take it one of two ways. You can go like, they've been so close to winning those games at the very end, buzzer beater, walk-off situations, whatever it was. But like, they had all the opportunities in the world against Austin. They just couldn't close the door. So given that context, like if I have Austin or if you have Carolina in the South Division Finals, those are the teams I'm going to favor over Atlanta just because they've proved it, right?
Can I ask a question before you answer, Adam? So I get the additions, but correct me if I'm wrong. No Eric Taylor.
He didn't, yeah.
No
Right.
MGH.
Right.
No Alex Davis.
No Joe White. You can keep
No Joe White, who was the person who carried them in their games last
and
year.
They were
let's
not
be real.
Great
they were just a
But
different.
they lost two of those games.
Not...
They lost the playoff game where he admittedly played really well. They lost at Philadelphia when he played really well. Obviously, he played even better when they won in DC the night before. But they lost at home to Atlanta when they had Joe White in the lineup. I think they had a losing record with Joe White. To take nothing away from White, it's a team game.
That's only because their wins against Dallas and Houston were when he wasn't playing. So, like, you can look at it from that perspective.
Look, man, you can argue with
like,
the numbers. I'm just saying I think they had a losing record with Joe White in the lineup.
I'm throwing away last year. That was, like, the weirdest one-off year for a franchise in my mind. Just, like, given how consistent they were until last year, and then all of a sudden this roster inconsistency and having to, like, force the Joe White show, it was never a thing that was built to last. Whereas this year, I'm like, okay, hopefully they're going back to their roots. Still remains to be seen how much all these guys are going to be playing, but I guess I see the path to success a lot more easily this year.
How does one go back to one's roots when one's roots have been removed and uprooted via, MGH, Alex, these guys?
You're leaving out some major players that they have.
Their backfield is still Saul Yannick, Elijah Long, who was maybe the most underrated high-volume thrower in the league last year. He was like top 5 in total completions, completing at like 95.5%. If you
still Jacob Fairfax, Cam, you like Jacob Fairfax?
Jacob Fairfax is really good.
I love Jacob Fairfax, but I just don't. A team that struggled so much last year, and I get, like, there's some additions.
Yeah, it's Siraj Mataraju starting on offense last year against DC. They were totally topsy-turvy. Do you not remember those rotations? It was insanity.
Alex Davis missed half the year, too.
I do remember, but, like,
that Denardis was, like, trolling us with a couple of those first lineups, and he was just running everyone, like 8 points, both lines.
Yeah. It was ridiculous.
I just don't see right now, and maybe I just can't see the forest for the trees. I can admit that is possible here, but I don't know how this. I felt like last year they had so many problems moving the disc. Saul Yannick was quite bad last year by his standards, especially, and I know that there was like this rotation of players in and out, but it's just like, I don't know how taking some of these staples away who were such a big part of the success that they had when they won their championship and had a very good 2022 season. And all of a sudden you're like throwing these guys in who like have done some things, sure. But like, I don't see how this makes them objectively better than the Atlanta team that was all throughout the regular season, without a doubt, the best team in that division. I guess that's where I struggle. Like, to be so confident in them when I feel like they kind of have to reprove it.
I'm not like overly confident.
I also wouldn't say I'm so confident in them, but they're my pick to win the South. I do think the Matt Guccio-Hannes loss to me is like the real concern there, because like you said, if it's forced like too much responsibility on Saul Yannick to be like the one guy in the backfield. I do really like Elijah Long, but the Yannick Long connection is nowhere near what the Yannick Guccio-Hannes connection was. So, if they're struggling in the backfield, if they're struggling with resets, obviously that ruins the whole offense. But just like, you can write an O-line down on paper that very closely resembles one of the most successful offenses we've seen in the last 5 years, which I like. And then Drew Swanson on defense. So that's kind of what I look at. Cam, I know you're focused on all their losses. Look at their additions.
The Drew Swanson thing, I think, needs to be hyped up a little bit more. I mean, he's one of 6 players ever to average 2+ blocks a game. And in modern years, too. This isn't like you go and look at the other 5 players, half of them didn't play past like 2015. Back when teams are averaging like 20 blocks a game at some points. The old Madison Radicals block numbers are stupid. Peter Graffey was just eating at a time in which turnovers were falling off trees, basically. I mean, Swanson added to a defense that has perennially struggled to get takeaways and yet is still somehow pretty efficient on that side of the disc, I think is huge. I think that they're very much a team and a culture that has that like grind set mindset. And yeah, like to Daniel's point, last year was a down year. Now they've got fodder, man. Now they've got coal in the furnace. Yeah, we lost the season series 3-1 last year to Atlanta. Know who we get week 1? Atlanta. Know who we're starting off with basically our strongest version of our lineup almost in week 1? Atlanta. Know who's missing a couple people this weekend? Atlanta. Like, I don't know. There's something almost like karmic about Carolina this year where they've sort of like turned it over and it's different. But I hear you. It could be another year of up and down. They've got a few people on World's rosters that could throw some chaos into their lineup and rotations. Yannick and Anders Jungs being 2 of their players. So yeah, I totally agree. And back to the main question about Atlanta, I'm gonna sell. I don't know that I favor either of the other 2 potential South Division contenders in Austin or Carolina, though. I'm back like where we started last season, where I just see them all as basically 3 of the same teams. I mean, we haven't even spent any time talking about Austin. Are we all just convinced that Whitehoff playoff run was like what they could do, and now they kind of scat back to like what happened last season during the regular season when Carolina and Atlanta just kind of like handled them? Like, it feels like a lot of people are approaching confusing Saul Yannick and the Austin Soul. The Soul shouldn't be allowed in the same division. We should change that. The Soul, like, that's still a really good team. And I hear you guys, and it reflects very much my own thinking, where I keep just putting them off to the side in this way that I think is too disrespectful for what they just went through. I mean, again, they won back-to-back road playoff games to make championship weekend. That hasn't really happened before. That is a tremendous accomplishment. And this is on the back of a season in 2022 when we all went in saying they've got the toughest schedule. I don't know if they clear 6-6. They go 9-3. And they go really close to beating a very, very good Flyers team on the road in the 2022 playoffs too. They were nipping at their heels. And so, like, I'm selling at Atlanta, but I don't like anything else because I just feel like it's going to be another melee. Strength of schedule is going to be such an indicator. And then given what Austin did on the road last year in the playoffs, I'm half tempted to take the 3rd seed just for the fun of it this year, you know? Just to say, hey, the Soul did it last year. I bet Atlanta can do it this year. Carolina did it basically to go to the championship game. They beat, or to championship weekend in 2021. There was only one game to go to championship weekend that year. There wasn't the first round, but they beat DC. Really good DC team. I don't know, man. It's a fun division. Is gonna be
I feel like I'm just always thinking of Austin as the underdogs. Like, they have the underdog mentality, so that's where I put them. Regardless of how much they prove themselves every year. It's like they're gonna earn it, and they like being in this spot.
Yeah, I think they kind of bring it on themselves too, because their players like just approach everything with kind of this very not serious attitude when it comes to like what they post on social media.
Free J-Rad shirts,
you know, just the
championship weekend.
Yeah, like they kind of act like goons sometimes, so you're just kind of like,
awesome.
yeah, the bunch those guys over there. And also, like, even me, like, I know Steven Najee fairly well. Was teammates with him in both club and with the AlleyCats. Like, I've spent a lot of time around Najee, and Najee is at the same time the most serious and the goofiest person like that I've ever met. So it's just like the whole it's them against the world. Like, it's like no one believes in us. It's very much the same mentality that Philly has in the East. They're maybe not quite as loud about it, but they still kind of wear that. And yeah, I think it is. To your point, like I remember watching that playoff game in 2022 when they were at Carolina, and were it not for a wide open goal drop in the back corner about 3 minutes maybe left in the game, that was going to cut the game, I think, to a 1-goal game. Wide open drop ends up getting broken. You know, that 1-goal game becomes a 3-goal game in the other direction. But I was sitting there watching like, oh my gosh, Austin might do this. We could be talking about a team that's back-to-back championship weekend appearances. They probably do deserve more credit than a lot of us give them. But I think also just historically, Austin was little brother to Dallas for so long. And then really, even when they were better than Dallas, could never really compete with the big boys in that division. So maybe we just need to recalibrate in our minds what it means to be the Austin Soul, because they have earned respect that we should be giving them. But that being said, Atlanta's still going to championship.
I was just thinking, I think one of the most interesting things about the South Division, as opposed to almost any other division, I feel like all three of those teams consider how they ended last season to be total failures, right? Like, you have Atlanta's heartbreak in the South Division championship game. You have Carolina just kind of bombing out on the road in their first game. Sorry, earlier I said that Austin played on the road. That was a total mistake. I don't know where my brain was.
Oh, that's right.
Pardon me.
I just took
because that's what we think
you
of
guys
Austin.
I'm putting this on you. I'm putting this on both of you.
It's because they were the underdogs. Like they were home underdogs. At least that was what.
Yeah, I do.
We expected them. We expected Carolina to win. So.
Yeah. It was something about they were 9-3, but majority of those wins were against, the Dallases and Houston. Who, again, if those teams
happen again,
if one of those teams could pick off a game from Austin, Atlanta, or Carolina, then this just goes absolutely over the boiling point. No, I just wanted to say, I think that the South is going to be really interesting to watch because all three of their top teams are coming off of kind of well below where they saw themselves finishing the season. And I think it'll be really interesting to see kind of how each approaches the mental aspect of dealing with that. Because it's funny. I think that if you were to be objective, they all three were actually pretty successful in their campaigns. I think Austin overcame a lot of different odds in order to make it to championship weekend. I actually think Carolina did perform pretty well for all of the obstacles that they placed in their way. And Atlanta won 10 regular season games and once again came within basically some of the most mysterious plays we've ever seen in a playoff setting from making the first championship weekend. And now on to our final topic. I keep calling them questions, but they're not that. They're statements. Buy, sell, hold. Cam, this is a Central Division 1, so we're going to go to you first. Buy, sell, or hold. Minnesota will win the 2024 Central Division title, making themselves repeat champions of the division.
I could use my hold here and be like, hey, I don't want to rile anyone
you
up.
Have it. You've got it in the back pocket.
Use your hold. I'm rooting for it.
But I am nothing if not a person who speaks their mind. So I am going to sell. Go ahead, Minnesota. Put this on the whiteboard. Whatever you need to do to hype yourselves up. I just think, Indianapolis, we were clearly the second best team in the division last year. Minnesota, clearly the best team. Chicago, less clearly, but was in the third team in the playoffs. I think when you look at Chicago getting better, I can look at us and getting better, adding guys like Jake Kinnev and Jack Havey. We have a slew of some younger guys who are rookies who I think are going to do some great things for us as well. You look at Minnesota losing Abe Coffin. I know they added guys like Matt Rader. They added back, re-added Greg Cousins, who was a really good player for them. But I'm not sure what they're going to bring to the table. I'm not sure how much they're practice, especially Matt Rader, how much he's practicing, what his role in the team's going to be. Quinn Snyder is, got commitments with Team Canada. I've heard rumors that he's going to be playing T-line this year after being their main goal scorer, for the last few seasons. I just think there's a lot of change for them. And I also think when you just look at the schedule, it favors us. It favors Indianapolis. We only played them one time, and it's in Indianapolis. And that could be the game that determines, the home field advantage right there. They have 3 games against a Chicago team that's looking to be much improved from last season. I think there's the big names that were added. I think Lepler referred to them as the J Crew, or at least that's what I'm calling them. The J Crew, like John Lithgow, Jeff Weiss, and Joe White. We know Joe White historically, and it's been said as much, he's not going to be there for every game, but I expect him to have a huge impact when he's there. And if he's there for those Minnesota games, that is a huge swing in power. And then Jacob Reuben-Miller and Henry Goldenberg, I think are going to be huge additions for them. Jacob Reuben-Miller was an absolute spark plug for that Minnesota defense. He was as likely to get bookends as anyone on that team, including KPS. you add Henry Goldenberg, and I think like the biggest struggles for Chicago last year was their throwing, their throwing talent. Like I don't think that's even up for debate. They had so many problems getting the disc down the field, and now you're adding somebody who I think improves them immediately in that space, while adding some bigger and faster and just more athletic cutters downfield in Jeff Weiss and John Lithgow. So I think those 3 games, they're going to beat each other up. Meanwhile, our schedule, we have one of the easiest schedules in the league. Like we have 3 games against Detroit. Like I mentioned before, only the 1 home game against Minnesota. Avoiding Seafoam Stadium is a big deal. I just think there's too many variables to say that they are going to win the division. I think we have a great chance. I think Chicago is going to be much improved. I think they also might have 3 games against Madison. I can't remember, but they always, it doesn't seem to matter. Minnesota and Madison does not seem to matter how good either team is. Those games end up being way closer than you think they're going to be half the time. And they got to play New York and Colorado. I mean, that's tough games. I know they get them both at home, but that means that they're using 2 of their home games on out of division, very tough games. They're losing those in division home games too. And we have talked a lot. You all have talked about in the past. We all know it in the Central Division. No one wants to go play at Seafoam Stadium.
It's the new breeze where it's just there's the defense, there's the crowd, and there's some intangible environmental thing of the wind and the location of that stadium where it just
100%
conspires against opponents.
So I'm selling.
Daniel? Think you convinced me. I was going into this thinking, like, I do think Minnesota is going to win the Central, but, like, how can anyone ever say definitively that a team is going to win the Central before the season starts? Like, this division is always all over the place. When I think of Chicago, it's weird. I always focus on the Joe White edition. Totally forget about John Lithgow and Jeff Weiss and the Madison guys you mentioned. Like,
I feel like Lithgow is...
Those are matchup problems for every team, but yeah, like who's Minnesota gonna? I mean, they have Raider now to take on one of those bigs. Who, by the way, I did hear reports from Tim DeVile, the Radicals and Winchell just scrimmaged this past weekend. Apparently, Raider does look good, so for whatever that's worth, he looks good. But yeah, still, there's like enough doubts in my mind about Minnesota and about like the talent level discrepancy. It doesn't seem to be significant between Minnesota, between Chicago, Indy, like you said, Madison, Minnesota, always close games. I know they're playing that Super Series game in Madison, week 3 or 4 of the season? That should be super interesting. It's early. Maybe Madison doesn't have their usual injury problems yet. So yeah, there's like enough uncertainty for me with Minnesota that I will agree with Cam. We're selling.
I'm selling too. I'm reluctant to do it, but I keep going back to the loss of Coffin and the steady loss, I think, of throwing talent over the past 2 seasons. You talk about them losing Andrew Roy before the 2023 season, the retirement of Jason Sheeta over this offseason. There's sort of been this deleterious effect on their offense. You talk about, Cam mentioned, Quinn Snyder maybe going away. There's just enough tweaking of the parts that were working well for them where I'm worried a little bit about the bottom giving out on a team that showed us that it has a pretty low level to get to on offense. Like, I don't really have any questions about Minnesota's defense. It's deep. It's got a bunch of 6-foot-plus defenders who they can switch around into multiple roles. I really like that about them, and I think that they'll be planned well on that side. But on the flip side, I mean, Coffin was their sort of stabilizing presence in that semifinals performance. You go back and you look at his stats. He had 1 throwaway. He had a great quick turn huck to Quinn Snyder at one point in the second half that really like rejuvenated their offense at a time when it was starting to get stuck in the mud. You know, we like Josh Klain. We like Will Brandt. I just don't know that they're capable of not making a handful of mistakes in bigger games against the other tough defenses in the Central in a one-and-done playoff environment. Like, to what you two are saying, I just have more questions about Minnesota right now. And so I've got to sell it with, again, the logic of the Central's up in the air every season, it feels like. I mean, Chicago had those 2 years where it kind of felt like, okay, here's a favorite. But over the last several years, I mean, basically ever since Madison's crown in 2018, it's kind of been a lotto pick as to who wins this division. So I agree with all your points. I was just trying to say, Daniel, I think Lithgow is going to be the addition that makes the biggest difference for that Chicago team. I mean,
he's really
he was picking up for New York last year in a lot of their set pieces on offense. He has big game reps. He's going to come in and face these other teams in this kind of new central environment. I think it's going to be really interesting to watch him kind of expand his game even more. Every single time in New York, they gave him a little bit of a bigger role. He really stepped into it. That playoff or the overtime game against Philly last year, they were without Ryan Osgar. They put Lithgow into his position, and he completed 50 plus throws. I mean, I don't know. I'm really excited for what Chicago's doing. I just think there's a lot of chaos, but
I will say one thing to say about Minnesota. I feel like I have questions about them every year. I definitely had them like throughout last season, and they scrapped together so many like weird offensive and defensive lineups, but they still they went 10-2 in the regular season. So like I'm not gonna put it past them that they couldn't have another season like that this year. But agreed, there's always gonna be question marks all throughout the Central.
Daniel just couldn't get out of this episode.
I had to do it. I had to do it just to like fit it in before we part ways. This has been fun.
Like old times. It's just like
just like old times. Daniel, I have to thank you for setting the groundwork for Swing Pass and allowing me to come in. I was really excited to find out that we were going to record together. Glad to have you on for the episode and be able to kind of be a part of the trio.
I appreciate you inviting me on. I mean, I really enjoy listening every week. Like, I'm not just saying that. Like, you guys do an incredible job. Cam, you've stepped in seamlessly to the co-host role. And it's really just like a fun thing to be a listener. So I really appreciate what you guys do.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to give them 2 thumbs up. Viewers at home,
let's
be
go.
prepared.
Come on.
Fireworks, baby. Let's go. We figured this out in Riverside when I did it randomly in the pre-show. But yeah, if the host throws double thumbs up, you get a cool fireworks animation. So
it's awesome. Well-deserved all around. Those are for everyone.
Pretty neat. We really don't hold back any of the stops when we bring on special guests in this show. Fireworks, the whole nine.
Oh, the visual effects budget out of the roof right now. It's just overflowing.
Well, thank you so much again for joining us, Daniel. Obviously, it's been a total treat. That'll conclude this inaugural segment of Buy, Sell, Hold, but I think we're going to have you back on at some point throughout the season and do this again another couple of times. But we bid you adieu for now. Cam and I will be back just after this break, and we will be previewing Week 1 opening poll. First set of games, 9 of them on deck this weekend. Let's go.
The West Division in 2023 belongs to the Salt Lake Shred.
DC certainly won the offseason, and I thought going into the season, they were the second best team in this league.
Edmond sizes it up and scores! Continuation to Jordan Kerr, and that works!
We're excited. We want to win the first points, and we want to win the game. They have that sort of optimized O-line.
And it's caught by Johnny
Our offense is just so talented. Really proud of those guys, and really proud of our momentum. Looking forward to even more.
Look out for the DC breeze.
It would just be nice if that Daniel guy was a little bit easier to get along with, you know? Like, I feel like it's just so hard to step back into a rhythm with him after a couple months off on this show. No, I mean, that we need to do that segment like all the time now, I feel like.
No, that was great. It was great having him back. Obviously, I was a listener for the time that he was on the show, so to be able to be on the podcast with him was pretty awesome. So,
well, we don't want to waste too much time here on this show. Again, we've just got so much to get to, so let's just blitz right into Week 1 game previews, and let's start with the tippy top most important matchup, and it's got to be that sweet Super Series game between DC and Salt Lake. This is something that I've been looking forward to since I heard about it late in the fall about a potential interdivisional matchup. This is kind of one of those hypothetical ones that, due to geographic distances, interdivisional scheduling, etc. It just never really kind of presented itself in my mind that like the Breeze and the Shred, basically the two competitors for New York over the past 2 years, get a chance to square off and sort of do some kind of transitive property dance around who could potentially be the true challenger for New York, right? But now as we've kind of been barreling towards this matchup, it's really dawning on me what a unique opportunity this is. I mean, I think that there's going to be a lot of feeling out at the beginning of this game. These are two teams with such, I think, rich coaching traditions and disciplined systems that to just expect them to sort of engage in almost like exhibition ultimate and just start throwing the disc back and forth at the beginning, I don't really anticipate that. I think there might even be some nerves. But I think that once this game kind of works itself into its groove, we have a chance to really see an instant classic. Because, I mean, these two offenses, their speed, again, they're kind of training together. I really think that there's a chance for some fireworks. What are your kind of just top of head thoughts heading into Breeze versus Shred on Saturday night?
You know, I think on one side, over on the Salt Lake side, we have so much known quantities. We know what we're looking at. We're looking at a lineup that's largely similar to what they put out last year, which was excellent. And then we have a lot of questions for DC. New head coach, the absence of some staples over the last couple of seasons, and even beyond that, like the loss of Christian Boxley, Ben Ort, who was great for them last year, not returning to the team this year. Joe Merrill going from DC back to Salt Lake.
Can you call it a Joe Merrill revenge game when he's such a nice guy? I feel like he would just show up and be like, "No, I love everybody." But it's a Joe Merrill revenge game.
Yeah, who's he even getting revenge on? He's been back and forth and back and forth. Like, it's hard to keep track of at this point. I just assume he's going to be back in DC in 2025 just to keep up with the pattern at this point. But, you know, the DC, not only that, but losing some big important pieces on defense. Like, we don't talk a lot about the defense for DC Breeze because their offense is so much of the focal point with their like slow tempo, high completion percentage, like really just trying to make very precise passes across the field with some small ball ultimate. We don't talk about their defense probably as much as we should. But losing guys like Musa Jaw and Alexander Fall.
I'll list it for you. It's David Cranston, Musa Jaw, Alexander Fall, and I'm going to be blanking on one. They did add Troy Holland. Joe Merrill. Yeah, no, that was another defensive starter. And Troy Holland was absent, but he has been added to their practice player lineup. He was a tremendous talent for them the past couple of seasons. Obviously, so he made a World Games roster this year. That's part of the reason why he might not be fully suited up at the beginning of the season. We'll see if the Breeze can work him into rotation. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, those five guys, Cranston, Merrill, Ja, Fall, and Holland, those are starters on virtually any unit in the league.
Yeah, and it's just like, it's kind of like this unknown quantity with DC. Like, I don't know what we're going to get. I don't even know who their starting O-line is going to be. Not that I really could have said I knew who their starting O-line was going to be last year, because it was, I don't know, take your pick between these 15 players who's going to be on there. But it's just one of those things where I just feel like I have so many questions about DC, and I feel like I already know the answers with Salt Lake. And I think this being the first game of the season, add that to the fact that DC's traveling across to Salt Lake. This is a road game. I feel like Salt Lake is definitely in the driver's seat in this game, like already. I feel like they just have so many advantages going into it. That being said, DC loses all this talent. They're about as deep as a roster as you could get last year. So while losing those players, you can't really replace them. If a team could sustain those types of losses, DC would be towards the top of who would come to your mind that would be able to do that. So I'll be curious to see who steps up into those roles, and like if anyone makes a name for himself in this game. But I do favor Salt Lake just from the consistency standpoint. They're coming into it with pieces that know how to play together and work together and have developed, they've dug out roles for themselves on this team already. So That being said, this could be a new and exciting DC offense when they have to move some different pieces around. So we'll see.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that it very much feels like an established identity in Salt Lake versus one that's undergoing a bit of development right now in DC. I mean, you kind of mentioned it. Obviously, the departure of the longtime head coach, Gerald Stanley, has created this opportunity for Lauren Boyle to step in as the new head coach for the Breeze. And that's going to be a really interesting development to watch, to see if they kind of keep some of those small ball oriented philosophies on offense, if they maybe adapt a bit, if they try to strike out a little bit more vertically. This has been a very Huck challenged DC team the past couple of years. And while it hasn't always come to bite them, I think we've all kind of learned there are moments in which their offense can feel a little constricted at times and how it operates on the field. And obviously losing somebody, the star level talent of a Christian Boxley, is going to have significant effect on kind of the precision of this machine. But you were talking about who you were interested in to see step up into bigger roles. And I've got to say, this French dude, this Elliot Bonet, who lit up Beach Worlds last year, led all divisions in scoring, was kind of the star player for the gold medal French team. He steps in as kind of one of the possible solutions for the departures of Boxley and Ord on offense. And I've got to say, man, given what I've seen of him and his training regimen on his social media channels, and knowing how French players have performed before in this league, you talk about Quentin Bonnard, Sasha Kwiatkowski, and Quentin Roger, all of which played with Montreal in years prior. I mean, Bonnard and Kwiatkowski are two of the top 20 per game goal scorers this league has ever seen. You know, I don't think it's outside of the imagination to say Bonnet could slide right. I hope I'm saying it correctly. Bonnet. I never took French, so excuse me. But if he can step in and just start scoring, I think that that's absolutely a possibility. And given the throwing talent already on DC, I don't think they need to ask him to do much outside of go out there, be fast, catch what we throw to you, which could work out really well for a DC team that I think struggles to find simplicity in its offense, right? Like, I think that that's sort of been the problem at times with their small ball approach. It's so inclusive and encompassing that in tighter moments, it wasn't always clear who they were going to. Last year, it was Boxley, and I feel like that's what made DC so much more elevated in some of their elite performances. But then now without him, where are they going to go to? A rookie? Who knows? But there's still so many talented pieces on this DC team. I mean, even if Bonnet doesn't step up immediately in his debut this weekend, you've still got, you know, all UFA member Johnny Malks, Rowan McDonald, former league MVP, Andrew Roy, who still is now probably without Matt Johannes being back with Carolina, probably the most efficient pivot passer in the league. Would you agree with that in Andrew Roy?
If not then definitely in the conversation.
Yeah, like 1A, 1B. So you've got that to set up.
Sure.
You've ostensibly almost created a little bit more opportunity for Thomas Edmonds to step in on offense. And all that guy did last year was win Canadian Ultimate Player of the Year and be one of the most talented all-around and balanced offensive players over the last several. Now with the full opportunity to take some keys and maybe more of the identity of a good winning team and push a little bit further than we're used to seeing him. I don't know, man. Like, for as many questions as I do have about DC, like, to your point that you made a few minutes ago, they're one of those teams that kind of has answers for it. If you were to trust a team to be able to take the losses of a Boxley and all of those defenders that we mentioned, it could be a DC, because I think you and I even discussed this on the show. It felt like at times that their depth had some diminishing returns, that you can't play 11 guys on offense. So to have a starting rotation that almost goes 11 deep doesn't always make sense in some of these more competitive matchups where you're restricting playing time, condensing rotations. And now it kind of feels like there's a little bit more clarity. I think that way on offense, at least. Defensively is where I'm going to remain skeptical a little bit. I mean, they've still got AJ Merriman coming off an all-defensive year. They've got Reese Bergeron as a captain who's questionable heading into this game. They've still got talent there. And I think that their main weakness that might be able to be exposed, their height, isn't necessarily going to be pressed by this Salt Lake team that doesn't really have much in the way of aerial authority, particularly without Clutton being on the roster this year. So I don't know. All I'm trying to say is that I think I agree with you and that DC has a lot of questions, but I think they can answer them. And I don't know if the ones that I'm really interested in finding out about will be answered against the Salt Lake team that sort of composes its roster similarly, where it's very speed oriented, lots of throwing talent, and a lot of players who can commit to the system, maybe outside of necessarily just pulling in the most talented, right?
Yeah, and I think if there's an advantage or a foothold that DC is going to find in this game, I actually think it is on offense, because I've mentioned this before, but Salt Lake, they love to play defensively with just like a lot of intense pressure, and they like to kind of out athlete you. And that's just not really, I think, going to work great against the DC style of offense, where they're not really trying to out athlete you most of the time. They're trying to nickel and dime you the entire way down the field with these short precision passes. Now, this offense might look different this year under Coach Lauren Boyle with some different personnel out there. I really do think like adding a Thomas Edmonds into the cutting space really does open up your deep game, because he is, I think, for my money, as good as anyone in the league at threatening you both with his throws deep and his legs going deep. And I think that does open up just a new element to this DC offense. Last year, Johnny Malks was clearly like, when it came to throwing the deep ball, he was the guy. But the thing was, he was also attacking downfield more. I could see some instances where Johnny Malks releases the disc upfield. It ends up in a Thomas Edmonds' hands, and he's actually hitting Johnny Malks on a deep shot. Like, I think that is something that needs to be explored in this offense. You mentioned the addition of Bonet. Looked great in sand. Excited to see how he looks on turf. And see if he can match some of that goal scoring.
I've seen the track workouts, man. He looks explosive still.
So it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, do they try to run this same style of offense? I think if they can open it up a little more, that'd be really great. But I think that they can always fall back to just these nickel and dime possessions when they feel like they need to, and maybe play kind of against that over aggressiveness that sometimes we see from the Salt Lake defense. Because as many great blocks as we see from them, they also have these moments where they get wildly out of position because they have been too aggressive trying to lay out or run through for a disc. And now they're playing catch up. And I think that's where they could get into trouble. I think if the Salt Lake defense wants to really be successful, they need to be patient and really pick their spots where they're being aggressive, because DC can easily punish you if you're trying to get too tight in the reset space. If you're trying to get too tight and lay out for too many of these undercuts, they're going to be off to the races, and they're going to be down in the end zone before you have a chance to recover. So, but I would love if this game was like, if DC could get a couple of games to kind of catch their footing with this new roster first. That being said, I also can't think of a much more exciting way to start the UFA season, like with this type of matchup between two teams that we assume are going to be two of the better teams in the league.
Absolutely. And I love your point about Salt Lake's aggressiveness on defense, particularly against this DC offense. I think that DC's ability to take away defenders' sort of rubber banding into space, I feel like that's how Shred's defense plays so well. They can anticipate those underneath blocks because of their athleticism and speed. And DC just won't give you those opportunities because their main foe and training partner has been New York. They know this strategy. New York applies a very similar matchup, one-on-one based, let our athletes go beat yours in each individual matchup, that DC will now get a very good version of, but it's not going to be New York. All due respect to the Shred, their defense has not shown it to be what the historic levels of the Empire defense has been over the last couple of years. And so, yeah, I think in both scenarios, both DC's offense versus Salt Lake defense and Salt Lake's offense versus the DC defense, that the offenses hold leverage. And to quite a big degree, because another thing that bears mentioning is that we said that the DC were going to be without this season, those 4 to 5 defenders. In this game, they will also be down another 3 of their starting defensive players in David Bloodgood, a captain, Jasper Tom, which was the name I was trying to bring up earlier when I was mentioning AJ Merriman and others. Terrific handler defender, and I really feel like someone that they're going to miss in this particular matchup. Him on one of the Jorgensens or something just feels like something that DC needs. They need Tom's agility and coverage skills in that space. And another captain in Reese Bergeron is listed as questionable right now. So those are some pretty major absences because all 3 of those players figure to be very important to slowing down handler movement, which is where the Shred generate all of this offensive energy from.
Yeah, and you know, Jacob Miller last year was just like on another planet.
He was a robot,
right? And you feel like
a cyborg with his efficiency. He just, if you gave him backspace, he would take that. If you backed him and tried to take him out of the handler space, and he would go big boy and be this kind of motion tight end like Jason Kelsey for their offense. Seriously, man, I mean, the amount of times he unstuck them, he kind of either did like a wheel route out of the backfield or cleared or something. He was always that cleaner fish for them. And I'm interested to see if he can continue to play in that zone.
Yeah, I got to tell you, as a cutter, like when you go to reset to your handler and you got somebody who's just got the size of Jacob Miller too, like you can just it just makes getting the disc to him so much easier. So like, even if you are putting heavy pressure on him, it just feels like it's so easy to get the disc back to him. And he's the guy you want to get the disc back to. I mean, he had one of the best seasons, I feel like, especially when I think about like the evolution of that Salt Lake offense from year 1 to year 2 and how year 2, they just were so much more efficient. Like for me, it all kind of starts with Jacob Miller and like his evolution into what he became last year. Like Jordan Kerr was slightly more efficient than he was the year before. But it didn't feel all that different to me. But what I really noticed when I watched their games was the backfield and that stability and it wasn't just Jacob Miller, but he was certainly at the apex of that. So this is going to be a great game. It's going to be like I said, couldn't imagine like a better one to start off with. Interdivision, 2 teams that are really great. And the Joe Merrill revenge factor. Let's not forget about that.
And on Salt Lake side, they will be missing a couple players. Most notably, all rookie team member McKay Jorgensen will not be making his season debut this weekend. He will be out, as well as Elijah Jaime, which is not a name I'm used to seeing absent from active lineups. I feel like he's been almost like a Steal Award winner the past couple of years, but that latter one basically means that we're going to get Joe Merrill back on the Shred offense right away. You know, he spent last year playing D-line with DC. He scored 50 goals in 2022 with the Shred offense. He now gets to slot back in after they made all of those aforementioned improvements you were mentioning. Could be a big night for Merrill against his former friends in DC. That'll be available for free on Saturday night. Again, all the Super Series games this season will be live and free on the league's YouTube channel. They will also be available for any subscribers who don't want to use that app as well on the Watch UFA TV. But moving on, we should go to the rest of the slate because we've got 8 other games to talk about in week 1. Most notably, I think outside of that is the game of the week matchup between Carolina and Atlanta. Last year, of course, the Hustle won the season series 3-1 against the Flyers. I think it was the first time ever that Atlanta has claimed a season series against their closest rivals from Carolina. But this week 1 matchup, I think, is going to be a bit of a doozy for the Hustle. They're missing some pretty key players on both lines. Just to list a few: Jakeem Polk, Matt Smith, Jeremy Langdon, Billy O'Brien, Aiden Downey. Like, these are some pretty big names in addition to the ones that you mentioned in our previous segment. No more Misha Freistatter, no more Max Thorm, no more Liam Haberfield from last year. So going into a game against the Flyers, the Hustle are really going to have to put up their best effort, because on the flip side, Matt Tucker is a late scratch, which is Very unfortunate for the Flyers. I really like the defensive duo of Matt Tucker and Drew Swanson, the new addition, being able to be a bigs defender. And when you're facing an Atlanta team that does have Brett Halsmeyer active, you need size. You need size to handle that mobile refrigerator, because Halsmeyer is just going to do what he wants in space otherwise, and in small space if you don't have somebody to contain him. And Matt Tucker felt like a great option, particularly in tandem with Drew Swanson, where they could kind of give him a couple of different looks. But Tucker will be sidelined. But other than that, it's basically full-strength Flyers. And like we were talking in the last segment, I think particularly Daniel and I, this Flyers team kind of stands to have some kinks to get out, and they're playing at home, and they've always kind of historically had the edge on Atlanta. And this just feels like a big prove-it game for both teams. I feel like this is one of those games where by the second half, it might get a little chippy just from familiarity and how these teams have battled through the seasons. Cam, what is your take about Atlanta at Carolina?
Atlanta has more former Cats players, so clearly they're the favorites. Fletcher Hare, Mike Kubira. It's unfortunate that Atlanta does have some players missing for this. You mentioned Matt Tucker from Carolina, but clearly Atlanta is missing more of like kind of what we consider like their top end players that are their higher impact players. I mean, Matt Smith.
One turnover last season. We should just say that every single time. One turnover.
And as incredible of a season as you could ask for in terms of just taking care of the disc and also still just being able to get open seemingly all the time. That being said, I still, I'm going to go back to kind of what I said in the previous thing. I still favor Atlanta here. A lot of this is going to be similar to kind of what I said in the DC game. Yes, the Flyers, some of the players that are new are returning. They've played with the Flyers before, but this offense is going to look different without MGH back there. Like we saw last year, the struggles with the lineup inconsistency and just maybe seeming like there was more put on Soljanic's plate, and it just didn't really manifest into what we're used to seeing from the Flyers. I am really interested to see the Henry Fisher re-edition. I mean, that guy is an absolute stud.
Fisher and Fairfax, man.
Also, yeah, him and Fairfax together. It's just good luck winning. And we've talked about Yacht and Babbitt, winning end of quarters, but I think Fairfax and Fisher are on a similar level
and you
as
throw
them.
In Swanson now too, if you need it on the defensive side.
That's fair. That's fair. So they've got these big bodies, of course. There's the Atlanta offense. The thing is, Matt Smith is not going to be there, but they have other people that they have brought in on occasion to fill in these cutting roles. I'm less worried about them missing a Matt Smith because it seems like so much of their offense, they flow from person to person so seamlessly. They have so many, Christian Olsen being still one of the most underrated players in this league, I think. And I think it's just because he's surrounded by so many other players that we love to talk about that sometimes we just don't get to talking about how great Christian Olsen is. Yeah. I think I saw a stat that he's about to become maybe their second all-time leading goal scorer behind, obviously, Matt Smith with just a few more goals. So, and that's something, if you would have told me that, I'm yeah, it makes sense, but if you would have asked me off the top of my head who their top three goal scorers were, I would not have gotten to Christian Olsen. And it makes so much more sense after, you say it, duh, this guy's just been consistently good for so long. So I still favor Atlanta. There are some new pieces that definitely are intriguing with Carolina. Drew Swanson being the one I'm probably most interested to see what happens with him, being completely new to the team. The last time we saw him, he did have a knee injury when he was playing for Seattle. We haven't seen him in the league since. So I'm interested to see, is it the same old Drew Swanson we saw before, who was getting blocks just consistently? It didn't matter who they were playing against, didn't matter what his matchup was. And I will tell you this, I played with, he was a teammate of mine in club, and I played against him. Do not put a jump ball near that man. Okay, just don't do it. It will not turn out well for you.
I mean, he's 6'5". He comes from a basketball background. He's a natural jumper. But I think getting back to Atlanta for a quick second, my biggest question for them entering into this week one matchup with Carolina is this when we finally get the big Hayden Austin Nab game that I feel like a lot of us have been preparing for?
Him, yeah.
I mean, we all saw what he did at Collegiate Nationals a few years ago when he just kind of like took over for a Georgia team that made a finals push. I still think, and I've heard a lot from the Atlanta people, and they still think too, that there is an untapped level to him. You know, he's been playing with this team in parts since 2019, but he's only started in 15 total games in the course of those 4 seasons of play, scattered throughout. We've never really seen just let him go out and do things, but we've seen these glimpses, right? Like there were glimpses in the South Division title game where he made a big block in the end zone down the stretch. He made a huge layout grab against Carolina and showcased some authority there. He's got the throws. We just haven't really had the opportunities to see it at the pro level. And this feels like the game, the matchup, whatever, the absences from the lineup where you kind of just give him the keys and see what happens. And I've been hearing from Hustle people that the offense is going to run a little bit more through Austin Nab and some of the Georgia system players. Obviously, they'll be without Aiden Downey, who is Georgia's Callahan nominee this year and one of the most up-and-coming offensive prospects in the game. But, like, getting back to Austin Nab, I just think it's his showcase time, right? Like, there's got to be, I think, one more player that sort of evolves for them this year, similar to how they had Holzmeyer kind of reach his potential last year. I feel like they need that from Austin Nab to especially take this week 1 game, which I disagree with you, man. I think that given the lineups, given the road challenge, given the kind of intangibles going into this matchup, I think I don't necessarily favor the Flyers the whole season. Like I said in the last segment, my South pick is completely up in the air as of now. But I think in this matchup, I take Flyers kind of heavily. I think that Atlanta's still piecing itself together a bit after that loss to Austin at home in the South Division finale.
I just like Atlanta's offense too much. I just
really
think
good
last
system.
year they just looked.
Tuba Benson Jaja's done a fantastic job of just kind of smoothing it all out. You know, I think we've seen aspects of it for the past couple of years, but last year, to your point, it just it did the thing that all great offenses do at a certain point. It got boring. They got a little boring. They didn't make too many highlights. They liked working it down into position and then letting Christian Olsen or Matt Smith or somebody else just kind of free up in red zone space and, clap catch. Like,
yeah, and you know what? I mentioned don't throw a jump ball around Drew Swanson. You know what they don't do in Atlanta on their hucks? They don't throw jump balls. They throw leading passes where only their guy can go get it, and it's just like they don't give you the opportunity as a defender to catch up and go win a 50-50 because these are out on a line in front of their receivers where if you're not right there on them when that disc is released, you're beat. It's too late. So I think they are, pardon my pun, they are tailor-made to beat this defense because they're not going to give them those jump balls. Austin Taylor's going to be putting those out on a rope. Like it's just not going to be there. Last year their offense was so good against Carolina. I didn't feel like they were ever bothered.
Carolina's defense will be better
outside
this
of the
year.
one game they lost.
I expect the Flyers defense to be a little amplified this year. It felt like last year, the hustle offense was just kind of doing what they wanted to in a lot of those games. They scored 20 plus, I think, in all but one. I think in everyone but the one game that they lost to Carolina, they put up 20 plus points. So I hear you. I feel like, to your point about Atlanta's hucking acumen, Austin Taylor and Bobby Lay, they need some kind of nickname at this point. Like, I feel like they're a little bit like Gohan and Trunks. They got some, Dragon Ball Z, like Super Saiyan, undersized, but just fantastically powerful throwers.
I only thought of really lame ones in my head.
Well, write them down. So. Put them back in the oven. We can discuss it all.
They're the throw bros.
Well, we've covered the 2 biggest games. We've still got 7 other to run through. So let's just kind of do quick hitters on each of the games. And we'll just start in chronological order. because honestly, it's now one of the most anticipated matchups of the entire calendar, simply for who's debuting in it. I'm, of course, talking about Boston Glory kicking off the entire 2024 UFA calendar by hosting Montreal on Friday night at 7 p.m. Eastern. That'll be available live on Watch UFA TV, and it will include the Babbitt debut in Boston. We've only had a couple weeks to really marinate on this news of the MVP moving teams. And it hasn't exactly been like the Shohei Ohtani shopping around in free agency saga. It's been this sort of, still unbeknownst to us, backroom, soured feelings, having to shift to a completely different and interdivisional rival. This Boston game has me tickled, man. Like we were talking about in the last segment, I have no idea what to do with this Glory team. No clue. I think that all of their talent on paper speaks for itself, and I think that all of Boston's results over the past couple of years also speak for themselves. And so I want to see how those two aspects clash. I want to see them against this Montreal team, to be quite honest. I think Montreal is a really interesting opponent because they were winless last year, and they don't really have anything, I think, to prove in this. And so I think it's kind of a terrific opponent for a Glory team that's never had expectations to manage, now suddenly having to kind of like win and show out in this home game where they added all this talent and they're supposed to be contenders in the East. So I don't know, man. I think it could go a lot of different ways on Friday night in Boston.
It's going to be fun. I mean, you've got some, like Bernard returning to Montreal, like amongst others, like these are the two teams that I think without a doubt got better this offseason in the East. I think every other team, you would make the argument, at least from where we sit right now, got worse. They all lost a lot or stayed pat. And then we have Montreal, who added some pieces and it looks to be better. You have Boston, who added some huge pieces, obviously the biggest being Jeff Babbitt. How can you not be excited? Like, two teams who got better. Let's see what it looks like and shakes out on game one. And there is going to be the question with Boston. I mean, it feels like just yesterday they signed these players. Like, they're just like walking off the plane, walking onto the field, and let's just throw Frisbee around and see what happens. So will it look awkward? Will it look like a bunch of square pegs and round holes the first week, or did they quickly figure it out, and are they going to go out there and make it look like they've been working together all offseason? We'll see.
The only other game available on Friday night will be an interdivisional, or I should say interstate, Texas battle between Dallas and Houston as the Havoc gets set to host the Legion. Havoc, of course, getting set to kick off their second season as a franchise. Dallas looking to recombobulate themselves after finishing with a franchise worst win total last year. Both these teams, I think arrows are pointing up, but still some pretty big enigmas as far as where they'll fit in this season. I kind of mentioned it in our last segment. I think if either of these teams can try to be a monkey wrench in one of the schedules of Austin, Atlanta, or Carolina, that will just set this division on fire. Like, if one of these teams can get to a point in Dallas or Houston where they can take out one of the playoff teams, that's going to make things interesting. So I think that there is some intrigue in this game. Moving on to Saturday. First up, we've got Minnesota at Pittsburgh. This has traditionally been a trickier road matchup for the Wind Chill. They just have a tough time against Pittsburgh on the road. You kind of mentioned the peculiarity of Madison and Minnesota. This Pittsburgh and Wind Chill matchup has a similar flavor to it, where for whatever reason, and no matter what the two teams are doing in their respective standings operations, like, these games will be a little close. And so, especially in Pittsburgh, I should qualify. The games in Minnesota, not so much.
Yes.
Wind Chill have been
not so close in Minnesota.
The Thunderbirds in that offense over the past couple of years. But for whatever reason, Thunderbirds at home could be a little bit of a challenge for Minnesota, particularly as we mentioned last segment with some of their departures in their throwing lineups. Moving on, Montreal has their second game of the weekend, this time an even easier opponent, just having to go on the road and face New York in their home opener, coming off of 2 straight championships and 30 straight wins, going for a league record. Also, Liam Haberfield will be making his debut for the Empire, as well as Sean Keegan We haven't even mentioned that. There's been so much late news in rosters this year. It's been hard to keep up with. We're going to be trying to as we get into the beginning of the season and start seeing these player debuts. But New York has a lot of intrigue just because obviously there's sort of the palace opera of what's been going on with the reigning champs. But I think there's the 31-game winning streak. There's the storylines about just how New York looks now sort of well into this dynastic pursuit. Like, I think there's legitimate questions about the age of this team, just their focus. You know, last year they were so lockstep, just this fist of concentration about getting to that title. Is it going to be the same right now? Doesn't feel like it.
It doesn't feel like it right now.
And while obviously impossible task asking Montreal to somehow come up with a win in the second night of a back-to-back, we have to go face this suddenly just athletically imposing Boston team on the road. There's the possibility Montreal could find their legs and get some sort of rhythm while New York is struggling to get off the blocks. I don't really envision that given how New York is practicing, so we'll see about the results of this game. Now we can move on to the West Coast. We've got San Diego at Seattle. While that might not have a whole bunch of interest at this point in the season as far as playoff race goes for two teams that finished below 5 wins last year, obviously you've got Lucas Ambrose debuting with Seattle. You've got Growlers, I think, now year 2 into their rebuild. Evan Lepler had a great segment on them in one of his season preview pieces this week on the Watch UFA website about San Diego rebuilding, the coaching staff there with Kevin Stewart and Kayla Helton kind of really taking it their task to be the sort of thumb in the eye of the rest of the West. They really want to make every game hard. And I think that that's a terrific opportunity for the Seattle team that wants to prove it's a real team in the West for the first time in basically a decade. So that's got a lot of intrigue to it. The other big West Division game, this is one that I wish we just had more bandwidth as far as how to cover a little bit, is LA and Oakland, man. Like, this was maybe per game the most thrilling rivalry in the league last year. Their last 2 matchups went down to the very final moments of the fourth quarter to decide the third and final playoff spot. I know you've got some thoughts about this West Division game. What are they?
Well, I think like the big news for both of these teams, unfortunately, has been the players they've lost in the offseason. Lucas Ambrose from LA and Mac Hecht from Oakland. Those are 2 very impactful losses on either side of the disc. And like you said, this became it looked like Oakland was just sitting pretty, like they were going to take this thing and make the playoffs last year. And then LA comes up and gets them in that second to last game for Oakland. And Oakland then went and, loses in that last game. So, like, we're talking about the 2 teams who were fighting all season for that third playoff spot last year. We're throwing in Seattle this year as a team we really think is going to compete there. This is one of those matchups that's going to really matter when we come to the end of the season. It almost feels like they're stepping into a playoff game right off the bat because, you don't in a series where you're going to have this head-to-head that's probably going to come into play when it comes to the playoffs, you don't want to fall behind. Like, that game is going to hang over your head the whole season. I'm really interested to see year 2 of kind of this new look offense in LA with Pavel Giannis and with Sean McDougal returning, seeing what Everett Shapiro can do in his 3rd season. They still got Michael Keough out there holding it down. He seems like he's ageless. I really think that offensively, LA will look better this year. But defensively, how do you replace a guy that's got, 24 blocks and just make some of the craziest, most insane highlight plays that not only get you the disc, but also they just feel so momentum shifting. Like, it feels like when Lucas Ambrose just soars through the air and gets these blocks that you just feel like are impossible. It's just so empowering for you as a team. You feel like you are on Mount Olympus. And when you're on the other side of that, you just start putting hands on a face. Like, what are we supposed to do with this man who's just flying in from outer space?
Well, and getting it on your best offensive player, too. He was doing that on the Travis Dunns, the Khalif El Salams, etc., the division, when he was getting started last year.
Well, and here's the thing. It's going to come down. I think LA's whole season is really going to be about Sean McDougal. Sean McDougal was so incredible for them last year, not only scoring goals, but also when they did turn the disc over, man, he was so good at helping them get it back. He was just kind of your do everything at a level up here last year. Like I kind of almost forgot about him in San Diego. He was really good there, but it just didn't seem like he was like the focal point all the time. But man, he came back and made some noise last year in LA. And I think if they're going to have success this year, if they're going to return to the playoffs, it's really going to ride on what Sean McDougal is able to do, both offensively and in those big moments when they need him to step up on the defensive side as well.
And I don't know if we call it the McDougal or the Fairfax, but it's that ability as an offensive player to just say no and go back and get the mistake or whatever back for your line and get that possession securely backing your offenses. Like, those two just are hellacious with their ability to impose that stuff. It feels like they just hit a button somewhere and go, yeah, no, it's mine now. Like, they just take over. A couple of notes about LA Oakland. This is the first of 3 meetings this year for them. They play in week 1. They will also play in the final week against each other. So not only might this determine it, they will also have the end of the year matchup to see who might eke out the 3rd playoff seed in the West.
Sounds familiar. Sounds like we're running 2023 back.
And there's going to be a lot of interesting, I think, replacement substitutions for how this rivalry functioned last year. We've obviously talked about Oakland losing Mac Hecht. They're also going to be without some of their more notable mainliners from last year, at least for week 1. And Keenan Lawrence, Dexter Clyburn, Walker Frankenberg is listed as questionable. Raekwon Atkins will not be in the lineup as he's still finishing up his college season in Oregon. So a lot to watch for there. But they do bring in a host of revolver players, which I'm really interested to see how those players integrate. You've got Eli Kearns, who's won a couple titles in this league. Justin Lim, who is a very good thrower. Jake Thorne, who played for Oakland a couple seasons ago, but will be coming back, I think, a much improved player. Ite Chang, who is a very good defensive energy player himself. Maybe not quite at Lucas Ambrose's level, but somebody who loves to throw his body around and try to get layout blocks. You know, I remember you talking about them losing Hecht, but I wonder if some of their defensive additions can be more of an aggregate gain for the Spiders last year, because defense is an area in which they struggled to slow down teams last year. Another name that I forgot to mention, Jason Valley, coming over from LA, another defender that the Aviators lost. He'll get to be able to play in this rivalry right away. I don't think he played in any of the Oakland games last year for LA, so that'll be kind of an interesting little tweak to this matchup. But that West Division one, I've got my eye on that. It'll just be a little bit difficult with, again, at the same time going on will be the game of the week with Atlanta, Carolina, and then, of course, the Super Series game late on Western time on Saturday night on YouTube. And then the final game of the weekend, we have one Sunday game between San Diego and Portland. And a little bit of a champagne game, I think, for both of these teams, as they'll just be able to get, whichever one wins it, the first win out of the way to kind of avoid maybe the ignominy of the pursuit of the winless season, which I think if things scatter out incorrectly for either of these Portland or Growler squads could be in the cards for them, but we'll see. We'll see. And that's just kind of a quick rundown of the 9-game slate heading into week 1. Do you have any last takeaways before we kind of really light this candle and get going?
I am so excited to get things kicked off and incredibly jealous of all the teams that get to kick things off this week as we sit idle for another 2 weeks.
Yeah, you guys don't start until week 3, right? Because of the scheduling quirk.
Yep, May 11th, we have our first game. So, but you know what? I think one thing that'll be really nice about this is like getting to kind of soak in some of these early moments in the season without having, I can just sit back and be a spectator, you know, like I don't have to worry about going to play my game, coming back and catching up on stuff for these first couple weeks. I can really just soak in what's happening everywhere in the league with all the rest of the teams. And that'll be kind of a cool experience. It will also just make me so antsy as I'm just wishing I was out there running around too. So, hey, right now, everyone's 0-0. right? You know, the old adage of when the season starts, nobody's ahead of anyone else, no one's behind anyone else. So everyone's dreams are alive. Everyone feels good about where they are. We'll see how good people are feeling after week.
Yeah, I mean, it's that, you know better than everyone else. It's that thresher and that momentum of, we have a chance, and then just, you know, rubber meeting pavement week 1 and reality just kicking in for everybody. And honestly, I'm on the opposite side, man. I mean, I know I'm not a player, but like, I'm the opposite of antsy right now. I am ecstatic. Like, I hate the offseason. The offseason is all, you know, projections and hypothesis and trying to guess where these teams come up. I just want to watch the games, man. I just want to get into this action. And again, like, this week 1 might be the most exciting lineup in terms of just matchup potential and storylines that I can remember. I mean, again, like, we barely got to LA Oakland, and I feel like that would be a feature matchup in a lot of different weekends or scenarios. So there is just so much to digest going into 2024. Again, with all the late breaking news we've had over the last few weeks alone, feels like we're kind of behind a little bit, just getting into the sort of meat of what's happening. And I can't wait to just have it play out. Like, that's my favorite part. To your point, we all get to just sit back and be spectators this weekend, man. It's going to be thrilling. And again, you can catch all the games live on watchufa.tv throughout the season, but you will also find all 8 of the Super Series games live and free on YouTube. Don't miss out on those. They're going to be fantastic. That'll do it for Cam and I on this Week 1 preview pod. We'll be back with you in not too long to recap what will surely be a thrilling week 1 of UFA action. I don't got any more words, man. Let's just get the discs up in the air. Let's go. Ultimate Frisbee is back.